Hello, my name is Catherine Crawford, and my author presentation is on Ralph Ellison. Ralph Waldo Ellison was born on March 1st, 1914, in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, to Lewis Alfred and Ida Millsap. Ralph was named after the celebrated poet Ralph Waldo Emerson by his father, who wanted him to become a poet. Ralph was the second of three sons, the eldest dying in infancy. The youngest brother, Herbert, was born 2 years after Ralph in 1916. Lewis Ellison was a doting father and loved his children. He also loved literature and was known as an avid reader and read often, both to his children and for himself. He worked as an ice and coal deliverer, but died from a work-related accident when Ralph was just 3 years old. His mother, Ida, then raised Ralph and Herbert by herself, working a variety of domestic help jobs to make ends meet. His mother continued to encourage her children's reading habits, bringing home old books and magazines from the businesses and the homes that she cleaned. Another contributing factor was a black priest in Oklahoma City who fought for and succeeded in granting access to the public library for African Americans, which at the time was considered a great privilege. That incident further exposed Ralph to the literary world. In 1921, Ida moved her family to Gary, Indiana to live with her brother. However, when both could not find adequate employment, they moved back to Oklahoma City. Ralph also had a passion for music. He started playing the cornet at age of 8 and later took up the trumpet. Ralph applied twice to attend Alabama's prestigious all-black Tuskegee Institute. He was finally accepted in 1933 on a scholarship, although he may have only been accepted because of the lack of a trumpet player in its orchestra. Ralph found the school to be as much class-conscious as white institutions and felt like an outsider. This experience may have sharpened his satirical skills, as he later wrote in The Invisible Man, and I quote, "He looks back with scorn and despair on the sniveling ethos that ruled at Tuskegee." Unquote. However, Ralph spent most of his free time in the library and cited reading T.S. Eliot as a major awakening moment in his life. He also credits his English professor as a major influence in opening his eyes to the possibility of literature as a living art. He remained at Tuskegee until 1936, but decided to leave before completing the requirements for a degree due to financial issues, planning to finish later. It was a fateful decision, as he never returned and became a writer and professor instead of a professional musician. He moved to New York and worked part-time jobs as a photographer and sculptor. He finally found a full-time job as a researcher and writer for the New York Federal Writers Program and was befriended by fellow writers Richard Wright, Langston Hughes, and Aileen Locke, who all became mentors to him. During this period, Ellison began to publish some of his essays and short stories and worked as a managing editor of the Negro Quarterly. From 1943 to 1945, Ellison worked as a cook in the Merchant Marine during the outbreak of World War II. He started writing what was to become his masterpiece, Invisible Man, when World War II ended. His second wife, Fanny McConnell, who he married in 1946, proved to be a valuable asset and a great support to Ellison. She supported him financially, working as a photographer, and would help edit his work, even type his text. They remained married until he died. Invisible Man was published in 1952 by Random House. It tells a story from a young black man's perspective who is struggling in New York. He feels misplaced, disappointed, and traumatized by the injustices and racism in South Harlem. As a result, the protagonist withdraws from society to a basement, becoming invisible. In 1953, The Invisible Man won the National Book Award. Afterwards, Ellison published more of his works. Ellison began to teach both American and Russian literature at Bard College. He also began to work on Juneteenth, his second novel. He released a collection of essays, Shadow and Act, in 1964, which he dedicated to his English professor. He also started to teach at Yale University and Rutgers University, while still working on Juneteenth. In 1965, Edison received the honor of his book, Invisible Man, being declared the most important novel since the end of World War II by a survey of 200 prominent literary figures. In 1967, Ellison experienced a major house fire at his summer home in Plainfield, Massachusetts, in which he claimed more than 300 pages of his second novel manuscript were lost. A perfectionist regarding the art of the novel, Ellison had said in his acceptance of his National Book Award for Invisible Man that he felt he had made an attempt at a major novel, and despite the award, he was unsatisfied with the book. Ellison ultimately wrote more than 2,000 pages of the second novel, but never finished it. Ellison taught at New York University from 1970 to 1979. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1969. In 1994, Ralph Ellison died of pancreatic cancer. Following his death, scripts were found in his home which were published in Other Stories and Flying Home in 1996. Ellison's second novel, Juneteenth, was published under the leadership of John F. Callahan, a professor at Lewis and Clark College. The book had been compressed into 368 pages, originally being above 2,000 pages. On January 26, 2010, Modern Library made the remaining manuscripts of the unfinished novel available in print, naming it 3 days before the shooting. On February 18, 2014, the United States Post Office issued a 91-cent stamp honoring Ralph Ellison in its literary art series. A park on 150th Street and Riverside Drive in Harlem, near his home at 730 Riverside Drive, which was his main principal residence from the 1950s until his death, was dedicated to Ellison on May 1st, 2003. In the park stands a 15 by 8 foot bronze slab with a cutout man figure inspired by his book Invisible Man. Just to note, I found in my research, I found two different dates for his birth. One was in 1913 and the other one was 1914. But more of them were 1914, so I used that. Wikipedia also offered a lot of information, but I had a hard time verifying it, so I didn't use very much of it. And just for future reference, I used a Windows Movie Maker, and I had a very, very tough time with it. I used the free version, and then I found out I couldn't save it. So then I had to buy the pro version. It was a nightmare. Okay. So hopefully that will help the next person down the road. I should have used Screencast-O-Matic. Okay, that's all I got.